Thank you very much for joining us today for the AASHTO R University free webinar series, Internal Audits, What's the Point? I'm Kim Swanson. I'm the Communications Manager at Resource, and I will be acting as moderator today. Thank you for joining us, Tracy. She is the Quality Manager here at AASHTO Resource. So take it away.
Perceptions. Is this the reaction you get when it's internal audit time? You can change those perceptions by focusing on one of the many benefits of conducting internal audits: improvement. This is improvement for your organization and improvement for you as an auditor. At the conclusion of this webinar, you'll be able to recognize the importance and benefits of conducting internal audits, interpret those pesky internal audit requirements in AASHTO R18, implement the 5-step internal audit process in your organization, and discern the differences between internal audits and management reviews. They are not the same thing. So let's start with a quick definition of internal audits. There are lots of definitions for this. I found this one and I highlighted some keywords. It's an independent and objective evaluation to determine whether activities comply with requirements and are implemented. In other words, you're confirming that your QMS has been implemented and what you are doing in your laboratory is in compliance with requirements. So it's really simple. We're confirming during an internal audit that you say what you do, and that's with your documented policies and procedures. You're doing what you say, conducting your activities in accordance with those policies and procedures, and you can prove it with records as evidence that all of your activities have actually taken place. We get this question a lot. Why do we have to audit ourselves? Well, definitely because you have to, because of R18, the requirements in that. If you're an AASHTO accredited laboratory, there is a requirement that you have to conduct internal audits. But AASHTO Resource already audits us. We sure do. And your internal audits would be similar to our third-party audits. However, as AASHTO Resource Assessors, we really don't know much about your business, and you'll be able to uncover more improvement opportunities than we can because of that, because nobody knows your business better than you do. So keep that in mind. Let's go through those R18 requirements. There's a bunch of them, but I'll explain them to you. Here's the first set of requirements. I highlighted some key words, and this is one of our learning objectives going through the requirements. The laboratory shall maintain a document describing the scope of internal audits. That's pretty easy. You have to have a document. The second part of that requirement there is basically another definition of internal audits, so we don't need to go through that. The scope of an internal audit is what you are auditing. We'll have more on that in a moment here, but just have to have a document describing how you're doing this activity. So the scope, what exactly are you auditing during an internal audit? Well, you want to think about those requirements in AASHTO R18. Absolutely. For the accredited laboratories, you have to audit for those requirements. Many of your laboratories also have to maintain conformance to ASTM quality management standards, C1077, D3666, E329. Maybe you're also certified or accredited to ISO standards 9001, 17025. Here at AASHTO Resource, we're certified to 9001 and accredited to ISO 17043. So when we do internal audits here, we have to make sure we're in conformance with those requirements. But don't forget this third piece. A lot of our laboratories forget. You also want to audit things in your own QMS, your own unique policies, procedures, and requirements unique to your laboratory. So don't forget about that. This is a very important piece of the puzzle. So let's go back to R18 requirements. That document that describes internal audits shall include the frequency of the reviews and who is responsible for them. Frequency. R18 does eventually get into stating that internal audits must be done at least 12 months. That means the maximum interval between audits is 12 months. But you're welcome to audit more frequently if you like. That's great. You want to be careful about using these words annually or this phrase once a year. Those don't necessarily meet the at least every 12 months requirement. So as an example, let's say you did an internal audit last month, January of 2023, and then your next internal audit is in December of 2024. Yes, that's annually. Yes, that's once a year, but that is not every 12 months. The interval there, you're talking about like 23 months, and that would actually be a nonconformity for AASHTO R18. Then R18 says we have to specify who is responsible for conducting these audits. R18 doesn't tell you who that has to be, but a lot of our customers think that it has to be done by managers or supervisors or quality managers. That's typically what we see. Those individuals are conducting the internal audits, but it does not have to be a manager or a supervisor or a quality manager. Technicians can actually conduct internal audits. Administrative staff people, they can also do it. I have had administrative staff people here help me conduct internal audits. You can also use consultants. No matter who you use, there are criteria to consider when selecting auditors. We'll get into that in a moment. Just make sure you document in your QMS who is responsible for conducting these audits. All right, more R18 requirements. The audit program shall address all elements, see what I did there, periodic table of elements, of the quality management system. And we already talked about it has to be done every 12 months by trained and personnel that are independent of the activity being audited where possible. All right, there's a lot there to unpack. Let's break that down a little bit. What are we talking about when we say all elements? If you're auditing to AASHTO R18, there are two major sections in R18, a section of management requirements and a section of technical requirements. You want to make sure that you're auditing both of those, not just focusing on the technical. If you're auditing for those ASTM standards, C1077, E329, or ISO standards, you want to make sure that you're including requirements in those standards as well, all of the requirements in your internal audit. All elements also means everything in your own QMS. Again, don't forget about your own unique policies and procedures. Quickly, what are the management requirements in AASHTO R18? Well, there are some quality management system documents you have to have. You have to train and evaluate your technicians and have records of that. Internal audits and management reviews. These are actually things that you should be auditing during an internal audit. Corrective action program, records retention. And then we get into the technical requirements. Again, there are QMS documents required in this section. Equipment lists, like an inventory list, your list of equipment that requires calibration, standardization, and check, and so on. Equipment calibration, standardization, check, and maintenance records should absolutely be reviewed during internal audits. How you manage samples when they come in the door to the time that they get distributed for testing to disposal. Of course, you're going to audit test records and test reports. That's why you're in business, to issue reports. Those should be included during the internal audit. And monitoring activities. This can include your participation in proficiency sample testing programs. We get this question pretty regularly. Do I have to include an evaluation of test demonstrations during my internal audit? Well, no. The short answer is no. R18 doesn't require you to do that. As you know, AASHTO Resource and CCRL do that for you. But some laboratories do incorporate this in their internal audits. And if that's something of value to you, definitely go for it, do that. Just make sure, again, that you're documenting this and it's part of the internal audit scope. All right, going to the individual responsible for conducting internal audits. They have to be trained, independent of the activities being audited. Those two things are in R18. But you also should consider when you're selecting auditors, the auditor should have a pretty decent working knowledge of what is being audited. Knowledge is key to an effective audit. If you choose somebody that's not really knowledgeable about your business, it's probably not going to be that effective. And again, this does not have to be a manager. So you may be wondering, well, how do I train auditors? This can be done internally or externally. There are lots of external organizations that provide training for internal audits. At AASHTO Resource, I am typically the lead auditor. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I created, and I go through that with audit team members and do my training internally. I keep a record of it, the month, day, and year that the activity took place, who I trained, my name as the trainer. R18 does not specifically require records of this training in the internal audit requirements, but keep in mind that records are your proof or evidence that you actually did that. So you should keep records of it as well. So then we get into why do I have to choose somebody that's independent of the activity being audited? And this should absolutely be considered when selecting auditors. Auditors should be fair, they should be unbiased. If you're auditing your own stuff, you're probably going to overlook things, whether that's intentional or not. At AASHTO Resource, we have a separate quality program audit. I'm in charge of the quality program here, but I do not audit my own stuff. Someone else is selected to conduct the audit. I don't even do that selection. Another person is auditing me. I'm completely out of the loop on everything. They're independent of the activity being audited. And you'd be surprised how many things you overlook when you're just looking at your stuff yourself and not having somebody else do it. All right. One last R18 requirement. This is an easy one. Findings from your internal audit have to be recorded. For my Judge Judy fans out there, if you don't have a record, it didn't happen, right? This is your evidence that something took place. All right, that's it for the R18 requirements. We're done with that. Let's move on to another learning objective. This would be the benefits of conducting internal audit. And when I was putting this presentation together, there were so many benefits, it was really hard for me to list them all. So this is not a complete list, but we can go through them and I can talk a little bit about them. If you need to sell internal auditing to your management, this will help you. Ensuring compliance, that's a benefit of internal audit. I mean, doesn't everyone really want to be in compliance with requirements? And this gets back to, are you doing what you say that you're doing? Are you doing what the standards say you should be doing? This is a big one, preparation for third-party audits. When you do a thorough internal audit, you uncover things and problems before someone else does, like AASHTO Resource, CCRL. When you have those third-party audits, if you're doing a thorough internal audit, there really should be no surprises when you have the third-party audit by AASHTO Resource and CCRL, because you've done a thorough internal audit of everything. Here's another one, identifying risks. When you're doing an internal audit, you can really hone in on problem areas. Maybe you're missing some calibrations, your test reports are incomplete, training has been a little bit inadequate. And you can figure out how to fix these things before they cause bigger problems down the road to your business. Improving efficiency. This is another one that you can use to sell to management. When you're going through an internal audit, you can spot redundancies in the work that you're doing. Think about how you can streamline processes to save your company time and money. That's a big one for management. And again, AASHTO Resource Assessors, we don't know your business well enough to really help you with this. This is a benefit of doing the auditing yourself internally. Internal audits are a win-win. It's a win for the auditor, a win for your organization. When an auditor is doing this audit, they learn more about your processes and they can help identify improvements or potential improvements. For the organization, weaknesses within the organization can be identified during the audit, brought to the management's attention for correction, again, before it snowballs into a larger issue. And overall, for internal audits, improvement. That's the name of the game with auditing. How can you do things better as an organization and as an auditor? All right, we're moving on to another learning objective, the 5 steps of the internal audit process. We have the planning, observation, evaluation, reporting, and the follow-up. So let's break these down, starting with planning. Step 1, planning. I will say that for me anyway, planning for internal audits here can actually take as much time as the audit itself. It's really crucial to conducting an efficient audit. You don't want to wake up one morning and say, oh, I forgot I need to do an audit today, and you're unprepared. That's really going to likely be a waste of your time and a waste of everyone else's time. So the planning and preparation, this is key. So you may know who this person is on the screen. This is Russell Dabbs. He's a senior laboratory assessor here. He's done hundreds of audits. He's trained, as we talked about before. He is independent of the activities being audited when he visits your laboratory. He's independent of those activities. And he's familiar with the audit criteria. But also keep in mind that not everyone makes a great auditor. Auditors should also be unbiased and honest, fair. Friendly is a good thing to be as an auditor. Approachable, so you get good information from people. They're not scared of you. Good communicator, detail-oriented. The list goes on and on. I know Russell really well. I've worked with him for a long time, and I can tell you he definitely has all of these characteristics. So choose your auditors carefully. All right. So with the planning, we're getting started doing some planning. We're going to talk about the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and the why you already know. Why are we doing internal audits? You already know that. The who we already took care of at this point. You selected a trained auditor. Who else is going to be involved in the audit? Are you going to have a team of auditors? Do you need to train them? What employees are going to be involved in the audit? What departments, etc.? Figure that out. What are you going to be auditing? That's the audit criteria. R18, the ASTM standards, quality management system standards, ISO, your own QMS. When are you going to be auditing? You want to schedule a mutually agreeable date. Having an agenda for people is helpful too. It lets them know when you're covering each focus area in the audit, so they kind of know what you're doing each day. Speaking of agendas, I popped up on the screen there, our schedule of quality related activities at AASHTO Resource. You'll see that next week I actually am doing an audit of our admin department. And then we have a proficiency sample program audit coming up in April, and then the accreditation program audit is coming up in May. I do internal audits, I think 7 of them a year, maybe more, programmatically to focus. We can really focus on the different programs when we're doing that. And this schedule I issue at the beginning of each year. I put Outlook calendar reminders in for everybody, so everyone knows exactly when all of the audits are going to be. Then we get into the where. Where are you going to be doing your audit? Obviously in your laboratory, you're going to be auditing that space. Are you going to be going back to the receiving area? Are you going to be going through the administrative area, purchasing? Are you auditing satellite offices? You have to think about all of those things. Scheduling interviews. This is always nice to do ahead of time. Who are you going to talk to and when? And yes, you should actually be talking to people during internal audits. So you can set up Outlook appointments when you're going to be spending some time with them so they know. Don't just kind of drop in because everybody's very busy. They might be in the middle of something. And then creating checklists. I'm a huge fan of checklists. So here's an example checklist that I prepared for I believe this was the internal audit of our IT program that I did last year. I did a little bit of research, figured out what focus areas I wanted to go into, and then questions I can ask in those areas. And you'll see those are my actual completed worksheets, well, just part of them from that audit. So let's talk a little bit more about checklists and their benefits. So many, again. You don't have to have a good memory if you use a checklist. I could never remember what I need from the grocery store if I didn't write it down. So that's tremendously helpful for me. Checklists can help you streamline the audit. You write down what you want to review, what questions you want to ask, and then it just makes things go so much more smoothly. It also helps with time management, helps you stay on track with your agenda, takes the guesswork out of everything. Checklists are a great place to record your notes and observations. These also at least help me with consistency between audits. I store previous checklists in SharePoint, and other people I work with, if they for some reason have to do an internal audit in my absence, they can look at those previous checklists, see what I was auditing for, what questions I was asking, what documents I was looking at, and that helps with consistency between audits. And then, of course, checklists can also serve as evidence or proof that you actually conducted an audit and proof of what you reviewed, who you talked to, etc. All right, with the planning, you also want to keep in mind that auditing is an exercise in sampling. You do not have time to look at everything in your QMS, every requirement. You don't have time to talk to everybody about everything that they do and look at every process. It's just not possible. You want to select random samples before the audit as well as during the audit, who you're going to interview, what questions you're going to ask, what documents, records, processes you're going to review. And also keep in mind the auditor will be selecting those samples, not the auditee. You're in charge of selecting the samples. So with planning, what documents should you consider reviewing? Well, obviously you want to review your quality management system policies and procedures, be doing a lot of that. Maybe the org chart. Is your org chart up to date? You've hired some new people. Have they been added to the org chart? Internal audit procedure. Are you actually following the procedure when you're doing internal audits? You could look at an inventory list. That's a living document. So you could see if you've purchased new equipment, was it added to the list? If you've discarded equipment, has it been removed from the list? How you manage samples, your subcontracting policy, if you farm out testing to other laboratories. So many documents you can review. And then records, the evidence that activities actually occurred. It's a lot of reviewing of records during an audit. Your training and competency evaluation records for your technical staff. Here's an example checklist that I used for the proficiency sample audit last year. We use a repository called TrainTrack for our training records, so you'll see a reference to that on there. I have all the guys from that program listed. Here I was actually checking to see if everyone has taken professional development within the past year. We have a goal in our quality policy that every employee attends at least one professional development activity. That's what this checklist was used for, just to give you an idea of what our information looks like. You can be looking at management reviews during an internal audit, records of those. Of course, you're definitely going to be looking at test records and reports, equipment records, calibration, standardization, check, and maintenance. Here's another checklist I created. This was for the laboratory assessment program. As many of you know, we carry kits of equipment with us into your laboratories. At the time of this audit, there were several kits available in our office, so I just randomly grabbed a kit and went through and made sure that all of the equipment had ID numbers on it, and those ID numbers matched our inventory, and that everything had been calibrated or standardized or checked within appropriate intervals, and that we're following our QMS procedure when we're conducting those activities. Are we using the most current templates available to record those activities? The person who actually conducted those activities, I listed there, and then I went back to TrainTrack to see if we had records in there that they were trained to do those activities, and then any comments I would include on there as well. You can review records of complaints during internal audits, corrective actions from your on-site or remote assessments, and low ratings that you received on proficiency sample programs, and records retention. If you say you're keeping records for at least 10 years, verify that. Pull some records to make sure they're at least 10 years old. All right. And then what questions should you be asking? Again, I mentioned if you're not talking to people during an internal audit, you're really missing opportunities to identify strengths within your organization, because auditing is not all negative. You should be identifying strengths as well. Strengths and weaknesses. You want to interview staff to assess their knowledge of the QMS, asking them what they're working on now, cross-checking what they're demonstrating to you or what they're working on to your QMS procedures, asking for improvement suggestions, all kinds of things. So this is a checklist of questions that I prepared for an accreditation program audit. During COVID, most of us were working full-time from home for 2 years. And one of the questions I asked is, how has the COVID pandemic impacted your job? What have we learned from that experience? Here I can uncover strengths and weaknesses that we might have in our organization. I often ask this question as well: what's the most difficult part of your job? This can lead to issues with inadequate resources or maybe training gaps, things of that nature. Again, we're trying to identify improvement opportunities. And by talking to people about these things, you can do that. All right, that was a lot on planning. I told you that it was going to be a lot, and the rest of these don't have as many slides. Now you're ready to actually start observing activities. You're actually doing the audit now and cross-checking what you're looking at with the QMS. I can't stress this enough. When you start an audit, it's really important to begin with conformance in mind. You're starting with a clean slate. There's no quota for how many nonconformities you should have on a report. Assume everything is in conformance. Don't have any bias or anything like that going into an audit. When you're doing an internal audit, you're essentially collecting objective evidence. I wanted to talk about this for just a moment. The difference between objective and subjective basically is fact or feeling, right? So if we're looking at these cupcakes subjectively, the person on the left loves it, chocolate cupcakes. I'm the person on the right. I'm one of those weird people that I don't really like chocolate. It doesn't excite me. So I'm getting my feelings involved. We're both getting our feelings involved with the cupcakes. But if we're being objective, we can both agree that there are 3 cupcakes on the plate. That's what objective evidence is all about, keeping your feelings out of it. Objective evidence can be categorized typically in one of 4 ways, and the acronym for this is pretty easy to remember. It's DOORS. And all of these items in DOORS should be involved in internal audits. The D stands for documents. These would be your documented policies and procedures. Absolutely, that's objective evidence during an internal audit. Observation is the O. Observation of ongoing activities. There should be a lot of that going on during internal audits as well. Then you have the R for records, records of the activities. And the S stands for statements. These are things that you hear during intervals, but you want to be careful with statements and make sure that you're understanding people correctly when they say things to you. So for example, you might ask somebody, explain to me how you were trained. That might be a good question. And then you're having an interview with somebody, they're telling you how they were trained, and you're looking at the QMS procedure for training, and these 2 things are not matching up at all. Well, that statement can and should be used as objective evidence to support nonconformity for that. So keep that in mind. All right, then we're moving on into sampling. As a reminder, again, you don't have time to look at everything and talk to everyone. You're sampling during the audit with interviewing. You don't have to ask every person the same question. If you're satisfied from what you've heard that the requirements have been met, you can just move on to another question. Also in the observations part of the audit, reviewing documents and records. We talked about this during the planning. These can be reviewed before the audit and during the audit. So you may have already done a lot of desktop reviewing prior to this point, or sometimes called a gap analysis, and you'll continue to review these during an audit. Here you're focusing on your documentation. Does it say what you do? And it's important to also make sure that all of your key processes and your unique processes are adequately documented in the QMS. And then the records, the proof that you are actually doing what you say that you're doing. During an internal audit, you're going to be observing processes and activities. These activities are typically going on, or it's nice if they're going on during any given day in your laboratory. And when you're doing an internal audit, if you observe these processes, you can continue to confirm whether you're actually doing what you say. So one of these processes might be equipment calibrations. Maybe that's going on in your laboratory. You can actually watch that happening and making sure that people are doing that correctly and in accordance with your procedures. Maybe there's some training going on or competency evaluations you can take a look at. Sample management. You're receiving samples every day. Go talk to the person that's logging in samples, ask them how they're identified, what happens to them once they come into the laboratory, and the distribution of them, and everything associated with that, sample tags, all of that. The testing and reporting process. There's always testing going on in a laboratory, so talk to your technical staff when you're not necessarily watching them run tests, but you're just asking questions about what they're doing, looking at the data sheets that they're using, making sure that they're using the most current data sheets, that everything's being completed correctly, asking about the process itself, what happens after you complete this data sheet, what's the next step, and again, cross-checking with your QMS. Meetings. We have a lot of meetings at AASHTO Resource. However, I love it when we have meetings going on when I'm doing an internal audit. By me attending a meeting, this gives me insight into what is going on within a particular program, and I can learn even more about our processes. And think about if you have any unique processes in your laboratory or things that are really complicated, pay special attention to those and make sure those are adequately documented in the QMS. And of course, interviewing people all along the way, asking questions about what you're seeing, following up, asking how we can do it better, focusing on that and continual improvement. Another thing to observe during an internal audit is a review of previous findings. So look at that previous internal audit report. Has everything been effectively corrected? If you're seeing repeat findings between the previous audit and the audit you're conducting, that's a pretty good indicator that the corrective action for the previous findings was ineffective, and that's something that should be addressed. You can also be looking for trends between audits. Maybe you're always getting nonconformities just related to equipment activities. That's something that you can kind of hone in on and see what's going on there. And if any improvement opportunities were identified on the previous internal audit report, has anything been done with those? How are they being tracked? Who's in charge of that? Or are they just kind of falling by the wayside? You can also review corrective action reports at the time of the internal audit. I think that's a great idea. All open corrective action reports, if there are any, looking into why they're still open. And you can include mention of this in the audit report. Maybe somebody dropped the ball and forgot to close corrective action reports. And also look at corrective action reports from the previous audit. They are hopefully closed at this point, but have those actions been effective? Again, are you seeing repeat issues? All right. We're ready to move into step 3, evaluation. So you've pretty much completed the audit, and now it's time to review everything and make some decisions on what you've seen. So here you want to tie up loose ends, dig deeper if necessary, if you have follow-up information you need to look at or talk to people, review your notes thoroughly. You want to make sure at this point you've gathered enough information to make decisions. This is something I learned at a training course a very long time ago, and it's really stuck with me. If you think something is a nonconformity, if you just think it in your head, it's not a nonconformity. Again, nonconformity should be based on factual evidence, not just your feeling. You might get a feeling like, oh, that doesn't seem like it's right. You have to link everything to a requirement. If there's a requirement for it, great, then that can be a nonconformity. If there's no requirement, and let's say people are using pencil in the lab and you want them to be using pen, but there's no requirement to use pen, it's not a nonconformity. That can be an improvement opportunity, but not a nonconformity. It doesn't matter what you think. Also, when you're determining whether or not there are nonconformities, think about, why is this issue a concern? And is it of value to officially report it in the internal audit report and have the corrective action process applied to it? Is your laboratory going to improve by correcting it? Maybe it's just like a one-off thing. Maybe somebody's name was missing on 1 out of 5 or 10 records that you observed. Does that really have to be a nonconformity? Maybe that can be an improvement opportunity or just a comment on the report instead, because those don't require formal corrective action. Remember, again, there's no quota. Start with a clean slate. You can have an internal audit report with no findings, and that's okay. However, keep in mind, if that's the case, and then AASHTO Resource, CCRL, and other third-party auditors come in, and your reports for those audits are riddled with findings, that's a really good indicator that your internal audit was not effective or thorough. All right, anatomy of a nonconformity. Nonconformities really have to have 3 parts. What is the requirement? I talked about that, linking everything to a requirement. What doesn't conform? What is the nonconformity, essentially? And what is your evidence to support the nonconformity? So you're probably dying to see one of AASHTO Resources example nonconformities, so I'll show you one here. This is from one of our recent audits, the LAP Laboratory Assessment Program audit. And you'll see here the requirement, and again, we're auditing to ISO 9001. There are some requirements in there about maintaining documented information. The finding or the nonconformity was that some of our documents didn't reflect current practices. That's pretty common when I do internal audits, that we forgot to update our QMS policies when we updated our practices. And then there is my evidence to support that finding. So I have 4 different pieces of information there to support the finding that we're not doing what we say we're doing exactly. So that ended up being a nonconformity. All right. Step 4 is the report. You know what your nonconformities are now. We're often asked, how should I report? What should the style of the report look like? It's really up to you. You have all the design power in the world, so go for it. This is just an example. This is the cover sheet that we currently use for AASHTO Resource internal audits. You'll see I have a block table at the top with some information specific to the audit. We get into when the closing meeting was held, any things that were not part of the audit, how we identify and classify nonconformities, that's all on there. There is also an example template for recording internal audit findings in AASHTO R18. And you'll note that this is not just a bunch of check boxes. Regardless of your auditing or reporting style, you want to make sure that you're including specific detail in your report. What records you looked at, what procedures you reviewed, who you talked to, all of that kind of stuff. I mentioned you can also look back at the status of applicable open corrective action reports. So there's a slide for that. You can see that's from an actual report. Here, the effectiveness of corrective actions from previous internal audits. And I also looked at applicable open complaints, but I'm not sharing those with you. I cut those off intentionally, so you can't use them against us. All right, and more with reporting. Here's a list of the employees that I talked to during the audit, and then the list of documents and records that I looked at. That's just a partial list there. I think that particular list was 3 or 4 times longer than that. I'm really thorough with internal audits. You may have heard that. Other findings and comments that you can include on an internal audit report: observations. I spoke about that earlier. Something of value to an organization. These could maybe be borderline nonconformities that aren't really a big deal at the moment, but you don't want to ignore them. Can be statements of excellence. Corrective action reports are typically not required for observations. You can include comments. This could be interesting information, stats, trends that you're seeing, and those opportunities for improvement. Always try to include those on your internal audits. That's what it's all about, the improvement. All right, and here are some example opportunities for improvement from a recent report. So here we're getting into, we need to create some new QMS documents or revise current documents, maybe provide some refresher training for people, discarding old AASHTO and ASTM books because we have everything electronically available now, streamlining processes. Those all ended up being opportunities for improvement. And here are some comments from a recent internal audit. Here we're getting into some non-critical information was missing from train tracks. It's not really a non-conformity, but something we should address internally. We hadn't created a train track account for a very new employee yet. But then I also included some positive comments here about regular review of QMS documents. We had somebody on paternity leave, and I gave the program kudos for the contingency plan that we had in place for that person. And then going into a closing meeting, you may or may not do this in your organization. You may not do something this formal, but think about who you want to invite to that. If you want to share the results of the report, here at AASHTO Resource, I always invite Bob Lutz, who's the program AASHTO Resource Manager. Steve Lenker is the director of AASHTO Resource and CCRL. I always invite the program managers and the employees within those programs. I don't necessarily invite the whole staff to the closing meeting. Communication is definitely key. During the closing meeting, you're going to be explaining findings, answering questions, maybe putting out some fires. And then think about the report distribution. You might have to make some amendments to your report based on those conversations. And then what do you do with the report? And here at Resource, I end up circulating the report to the entire staff. We're very transparent about our internal audits, and people really like to be informed of that. All right, the last step, this is a quick one, the follow-up step. This is getting into the corrective action for nonconformities. Make sure that you're accountable for these nonconformities and that you're actually correcting them. Who is responsible for correcting them? Is there a deadline for the correction? Are you following those deadlines? Are you getting to the true root cause of the issues? Are your corrective actions effective? And do your corrective actions result in improvement opportunities for your organization? All right. We're on our final learning objective here, the differences between internal audit and management review. I said at the beginning, these are not the same. That is correct. However, they do have some similarities. The internal audit, which is what this webinar was all about, this is more of a focus on implementation. Internal audits can be performed by anyone as long as they're trained and knowledgeable and independent of the activity being audited. Internal audits are specific. We're really digging into the weeds, dotting our I's, crossing our T's. Focus on improvement, I have that highlighted. That's something that's shared between internal audit and management review. And internal audit findings themselves are an input to management review, but it is not the same. And with management review, the focus here is more on effectiveness. Are your business goals being met? So we're focusing more on that rather than are we doing what we say we're doing. Management review, as the title infers, it must be performed by management. We're focusing on the big picture here rather than the weeds. And again, improvement is the name of the game for both of these things. There is already a webinar recorded for management review that I did previously, so you'll be able to access through that, our Reuniversity page on our website. So let's recap the learning objectives quickly. By now, you should be able to recognize the importance and benefits of conducting those internal audits. Interpret the internal audit requirements in R18. Implement that 5-step process in your organization: plan, observe, evaluate, report, follow up, and discern the differences between internal audits and management reviews. All right, I think we have a few minutes left for questions. So if Kim has any, I'm going to go through the slides here at the end just so you can see my contact information and how to connect with us at Resource. Slide on that. And I'll stop sharing my screen and Kim can ask me the questions that came in.
Yes, thank you very much, Tracy. We have plenty of time for some questions. And so I encourage everyone to use the Q&A to answer some questions. We have don't have many there now, but I actually have questions. So I shared, I know these are not planned, FYI.
She's trying to stump me, folks.
I am not trying to stump you. These are legitimate questions. And I'm also a co-host of the AASHTO Resource Q&A podcast. And we've done lots of content on internal audits, and I posted links to those in the chats, and they're available on our website if you want. But just with that background and what you've said. So here are some of my questions that I have for you.
Getting my pen out. Okay.
When you were talking about you have to document in your QMS who can do and perform the internal audits, how specific should that be?
Thank you for that. I meant to actually mention that when we were talking about that. We're talking about the person's title, quality manager. These are performed by the laboratory manager. You don't really want to include people's real names in your QMS documents because, of course, you have people retiring, getting promoted, people are moving around. So I would keep it a little bit more basic than that and just their position name.
And does it have to include the position name? And so what if, I'm going to say Joe, not picking on any Joe, but just picking a name of Joe. He's currently in this position and he's really good at this, but the person who replaces him is just not friendly. No one's going to tell him anything. So can you say just a designated member, or do you have to have a specific position? Because what if like the personality conflict, or do you include that in the procedure or something like that?
I would include that in the procedure. I was just going to say that because you want to avoid bias. You want to make sure you're selecting the right people to do the audit. So put some wording in the procedure that gives you that flexibility to choose others in those circumstances.
Okay. Well, I thank you for that.
Sure.
And again, people, you can ask questions, or I'll just continue to ask these questions. So next on the list, I have 2 pages of notes, by the way. I know. But I write big and not nearly as neat as you. So it's not that many questions. You mentioned on the benefits slide that you had a ton of different benefits that you could think of, but you only shared a few. So what were some that didn't make the list? What are some of the other benefits that didn't necessarily make the list, but might be beneficial for our attendees to hear?
Well, one of them, I just went through this with our new employees. We hired some new employees a couple of weeks ago, I believe, and I was doing some quality training with them. One of them, believe it or not, is employee morale, increasing employee morale. When you have a thorough internal audit program and you take this seriously, your employees get the idea that your organization really cares about quality and you're not just going through the motions because some standard says that you have to do these audits. And they were really impressed by that because I think most of our new employees have worked elsewhere. And they're like, wow, like we never did internal audits where I used to work. So that's really cool that you guys are actually auditing yourselves. That's definitely a benefit. And it also helps us at AASHTO Resource. I involve our quality analysts and our laboratory assessors in the internal audits. It helps them when they're dealing with customer questions because they're subjected, they're the auditee on this end. And then when our customers have questions or when they're actually doing audits or assessments at your laboratory, they're learning a little bit more about how we do things here, and they can relay that information to laboratories to kind of help them, give them some tips on how to improve their audit process.
Yeah, and I enjoy reading the internal audit reports and things from other programs. And you said it helps with the transparency, but also helps me learn about the other parts of the programs that I may not be familiar with. So that's a benefit to me as well.
Yeah, I love when people are transparent about their audits and their reports. And as you know, that's one of our values here. And learning, we're very much focused on learning here. When you share that information with everyone, you're hitting the mark. Then people are in the loop, they feel important, and they're being heard, which is great.
Yes, I would agree with that. So in lieu of more questions, I'm just going to keep going. So what would you have, like, if you had to give somebody one tip for how they can plan their best internal audit, what would be that one tip for them?
The planning is so important. Just take your time with it. Don't rush through it. I've done that before. I sometimes am flipping out, leading into an internal audit. You really need to take the time, obviously, to do the audit and not rushing through the audit, but don't rush through that planning phase because that is really key to conducting a smooth and efficient audit. And sometimes I'm working late at night trying to get all my pieces of the puzzle together, and that's not good. You want to go into there with, prepared and fresh and ready to go.
That kind of segues into my next question is, how long should internal audit actually be? How long should it take?
I can tell you here, I just do programmatic internal audits. I typically spend about a day preparing for them. The audit itself typically takes 1 to 2 days to get through everything that I want to review. And that's not necessarily including the closing meeting, going over the report with people. So I do allow myself 2 days for the audit, typically, and 1 day to prepare. We don't anticipate or expect, our customers to spend that much time. I know that's a lot. You guys are really, really busy. I mean, this is my job to do these things. But again, if you're only spending 5 minutes on planning and you get your internal audit done in 5 or 10 minutes or half an hour, that's really probably not good enough. You should be digging deeper, being more thorough with what you're looking at.
That makes sense. And we did just get a question, but what your answer just segues into another question that I had. So I'm gonna prioritize my question.
Okay, what time is it? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Is it a good idea, or should you try to time your internal audits to coincide with a training event or a calibration process or something like that? Does that matter? Does it help? Does it hurt? What do you think?
I think it helps. I love to actually see those things happening. I love when I'm doing a proficiency sample program audit and I can go back to our production area and actually watch them preparing the samples and sieving material and putting samples into the boxes. If that's not going on during an internal audit for the proficiency sample program, I kind of feel like, I'm really missing a lot by not seeing that happening. And like I said, I love it when the meetings are going on and I'll hop in on those meetings unless they're sensitive. They're talking about sensitive information, but I find it really beneficial. You can really gain a lot more insight by having those activities happen. However, I don't specifically schedule around those because like I said, I schedule things at the beginning of the year. If those things happen to be going on, great. If not, that's okay too. With the proficiency sample program, they're almost always doing something in the production area that I can look at. So.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Now, away from my own questions, we did have a question that came in. And when sampling during the audit, how do you determine what's a large enough sample size to give reasonable confidence of compliance?
We get that question a lot. I know there are documents out there and standards regarding this. It's really up to you. Let's say, for example, equipment records. For the laboratory kit equipment that I showed you earlier. That list that I showed you, there are only 5 or 6 pieces of equipment on there. So I'm going to check every single thing on there because it's not going to take me all day doing that. But when you're doing an audit at your laboratory and you have 150, 200 pieces of equipment, you don't do that. You don't have the time to do that. So I think 3 to 5 pieces of equipment and you're seeing that everything is in conformance and you're not really sensing a problem, I think you can put a period and move on. So it kind of depends on how much you need to look at, the total sample population, and what you're actually seeing when you're doing the audit.
I think that goes into a little bit of like staying flexible, right? And
absolutely.
I know we've talked about that before, about when you're in the, performing the audit, kind of follow the trail. If you, go on a kind of a hunt of noticing things, then like let that follow. While checklists are good, you don't necessarily need to, be limited by them.
Absolutely. And if you're seeing trends or repeat nonconformities from previous audits, you should actually probably spend a little bit more time and gather some more samples. I do that for sure. We've had some issues over the years with documenting training activities. It's not that we weren't doing it. We were definitely doing it. We just weren't documenting some of these things properly. And this was a trend that we were seeing. So every internal audit, I'm hitting that hard. I'm hitting that documentation of training activities hard because we've had this history of it being, there were nonconformities for that. If we didn't have that history, I would just spot check some things, 3 or 4 or 5 records and move on. But here I do hit that hard because of that history.
Yes, I am familiar with that. I had another question. If anyone else has questions, please type them in. We do have about 3 more minutes, but I am full of questions today.
Kim's a professional webinar attender.
Apparently,
Yeah.
apparently, this is my co-hosting skills from the podcast is coming through. But I did have a legitimate question of the difference between major and minor nonconformities and who determines that. Is that, like a standard thing, or is that determined by each organization, or can you go into that a little bit?
It's determined by each organization. That's not something that's in AASHTO R18. We do use that terminology here. Major nonconformities are something that really are detrimental to your business, or you have a history of repeat findings. And I'll be transparent with you. We actually did receive a major nonconformity on our ISO 9001 external audit this year. We've never received a major nonconformity because she was seeing that our corrective action reports, the auditor, sorry, not she, our corrective action reports have not been closed out in a timely manner. And she noted that last time, that was the same auditor last time, that was a major nonconformity. It got bumped up from minor to major because now we have this history. She wasn't satisfied, rightly so, that we haven't closed findings in a timely manner. But it is dependent on the organization. The corrective action phase is not really different between those two. It just looks a lot worse on the report. It kind of bumps it up as far as the corrective action is concerned, because then we had to go back, look at our root cause analysis for the first corrective action report, reevaluate that. We went through the whole process again and figured out some other things that will help us correct that in the future. But yes, dependent on the organization.
And do you have to have 2 levels of the nonconformity, or can just you have 1 level and that's that?
You can have 1 level. That's typically what we see. Yeah, and that's fine. And you can call it a finding, you can call it a nonconformity, whatever language you want to use.
Is there benefits to doing it one way or the other, to have multiple levels or 1 level? Have you noticed?
Again, it's dependent on the organization. Management at certain organizations might want to see those different categories. Other places, they might just be satisfied saying, hey, this was noted the last time, we're seeing trends in this area. You might want to think about, looking at the root cause analysis, digging a little bit deeper into that. So it really depends on the management of the organization.
Okay. And then I think we have time for 1 more question. And it kind of goes back to the sampling question, but how many people should you be interviewing during an internal audit?
Thank you for that question. Here, we have quite a few laboratory assessors, anywhere from, let's say, around 20 laboratory assessors. I'm obviously not going to talk to all of them. Also, sometimes they're on travel. I'm satisfied if I talk to maybe 5 or 6 people, laboratory assessors. Same with quality analysts. I think we have 10 or 12 quality analysts, so I might choose 5 or 6 of them. I'm also looking back at my previous records and seeing who I talked to the last time and trying to pick different people this time. That's not always possible. So that also depends on who's in the office on any given day and their availability. I always include our admin staff when I'm doing internal audits of all programs, because they provide critical support to everything that we do. So I always include them and their processes related to those programs. So it really depends. Always I talk to the program managers, Brian Johnson, John Molesky, Sonia Peterbaugh, making sure that they're really involved in the internal audit because they're managing those programs. I would never skip over them. I would never schedule an internal audit if they were not available to be included in the audit.
That is a great point. So thank you very much, Tracy, for sharing all of this knowledge. And thank you to our attendees for listening, and to those watching the recording or listening to this. And you may hear this as a podcast episode as well. And I do want to say before you go, you will be directed to a survey link when you exit this. So please take that survey, and your feedback is really important to us and does help us plan future and improve our webinars for you. So please definitely do that.
Yes, please.
And if you want more of Tracy, you can you want more Tracy, you can join us at the AASHTO Resource Technical Exchange That was hard for no reason. And that's coming up in March. And we have details on our website at ashtoresource.org/events. So hopefully we will see you there. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.